Ya no confundas bondad con ingenuidad. Porque el mundo no premia al que más da, premia al que mejor entiende cuándo dar, cómo dar y a quién dar. Durante mucho tiempo te hicieron creer que ser bueno era suficiente. Que decir sí a todo te hacía noble. Que aguantar en silencio te hacía fuerte. Que perdonar sin límites te hacía superior. Pero nadie te dijo la verdad completa: cuando no hay inteligencia emocional, la bondad se convierte en una puerta abierta para que otros crucen sin respeto. Hoy no vengo a quitarte tu bondad. Vengo a enseñarte a protegerla. Porque ser inteligente no es dejar de sentir, es aprender a no ser usado por lo que sientes. Mira, hay personas que confunden corazón grande con ausencia de límites. Y terminan desgastadas, vacías, entregando todo a quienes solo saben recibir. Y cuando ya no queda nada que dar, se preguntan: ¿en qué momento me perdí? Te lo digo claro, te perdiste el día que empezaste a justificar lo injustificable en nombre del amor, la amistad o la lealtad. Ser inteligente hoy es entender esto: no todo el mundo merece tu acceso total. Being good without boundaries can slowly turn into a silent form of self-destruction that most people don't notice until they are already emotionally exhausted. At first, it looks harmless, even admirable. You are the person who always says yes, the one who listens without complaint, the one who helps even when you are tired, the one who forgives quickly and avoids conflict at all costs. On the surface, this is praised as kindness, generosity, and emotional maturity. But underneath that image, something very different can start to grow: emotional imbalance, resentment, and the gradual loss of self-respect. When a person is constantly good without boundaries, they begin to operate from a place of fear rather than strength. Fear of rejection, fear of being misunderstood, fear of disappointing others, fear of being seen as selfish. That fear becomes the silent force behind their decisions. They stop asking, "Is this right for me?" and start asking, "Will this make others upset?" Over time, their internal compass shifts away from self-awareness and becomes completely dependent on external approval. This is where kindness stops being a virtue and starts becoming a vulnerability. Without boundaries, kindness loses its structure. Imagine a river without banks. At first, it seems free and beautiful, but eventually it floods everything around it and loses direction. The same happens with human behavior. When there is no limit to how much you give, how much you tolerate, or how much you absorb from others, your emotional energy begins to scatter in every direction. You become available to everyone except yourself. And in that process, your own needs become background noise that you slowly learn to ignore. People who are always good often attract a specific type of dynamic. Not always, but frequently, they draw in individuals who are unconsciously or consciously willing to take advantage of their openness. It may not always be malicious. Sometimes it is simply human nature: people take what is freely given. If you constantly offer understanding, people will lean on it without thinking twice about your emotional capacity. If you constantly say yes, people will begin to expect it as your default response. And when expectations are formed, gratitude often decreases while entitlement increases. This is where emotional exhaustion begins to develop. The good person starts to feel drained, not because they are doing something wrong, but because they are giving without regulation. They give time they don't have, attention they cannot sustain, forgiveness that is not always deserved, and energy they never properly recharge. Slowly, their internal world becomes unbalanced. They may still smile, still show up, still help, but inside, something begins to feel heavy, repetitive, and unreciprocated. The most dangerous part is that they often don't notice the shift immediately. Because being good has been praised for so long, they confuse exhaustion with purpose. They believe that if they are tired, it means they are doing something meaningful. They interpret emotional depletion as proof of loyalty or love. But real love and real kindness do not require self-erasure. They require balance. They require awareness. They require the ability to give without losing oneself in the process. Another layer to this issue is identity confusion. When someone is always good for others, they begin to build their identity around that role. They become the helper, the fixer, the listener, the reliable one. Over time, they may not even know who they are outside of what they do for others. This creates a subtle but powerful dependency. If they stop giving, they feel like they are disappearing. So they continue, even when it hurts, because stopping feels like losing their sense of self. But true emotional maturity is not measured by how much you can tolerate or how many people you can please. It is measured by how well you can maintain your inner balance while interacting with the world. Being kind without boundaries is like trying to light every room in a city while your own house remains in darkness. Eventually, you realize that no matter how many places you illuminate, you are still left in the dark yourself. Boundaries do not make you less good. They make your goodness sustainable. They transform kindness from something reactive into something intentional. Instead of giving out of obligation or habit, you begin to give from a place of choice. And that shift changes everything. Because when you choose where your energy goes, you also choose where your life goes. Without boundaries, even good intentions can lead to harm, not only to yourself but sometimes to your relationships as well. Because when you silently accumulate exhaustion and unspoken frustration, it eventually leaks out in other forms: emotional withdrawal, irritability, resentment, or sudden disconnection. People around you may not understand why you change, because they never saw the cost of your constant giving. They only saw the consistency of your availability. The truth is, being good is not the problem. The problem is being good without awareness, without limits, without self-respect integrated into it. Real kindness is not blind. It sees clearly. It understands timing, energy, and reciprocity. It knows when to step forward and when to step back. It knows that protecting your own emotional well-being is not a betrayal of others, it is a responsibility toward yourself. And when a person finally understands this, they begin to redefine what goodness actually means. It is no longer about pleasing everyone. It becomes about being honest, balanced, and conscious. It becomes about giving in a way that does not destroy the giver. You don't need to prove your value to people who don't recognize it, because true value is not something that becomes real through external validation. It already exists, independent of Anjonis approval. The struggle to prove yourself usually comes from a deeper emotional place, often rooted in the need for acceptance, recognition, or emotional safety. When someone does not acknowledge your worth, it can create an internal conflict where you start believing that if you try harder, give more, explain better, or show more effort, eventually they will see what you see in yourself. But this cycle often leads to exhaustion rather than recognition. The desire to prove yourself can quietly take control of your decisions. You begin to invest more energy into people, situations, or environments where your worth is constantly questioned or ignored. Instead of stepping back and evaluating whether you are being valued, you start overperforming to compensate for their lack of recognition. You give more time, more patience, more emotional availability, thinking that consistency will eventually turn into appreciation. But in many cases, it only reinforces a pattern where your effort becomes expected rather than appreciated. One of the most draining aspects of trying to prove your value is that it shifts your focus away from self-awareness and places it entirely on external perception. Instead of asking, am I aligned with this situation, or does this feel healthy for me, you begin asking, what more can I do for them to see me differently? This creates a constant state of emotional dependency on approval. Your sense of worth becomes tied to whether others acknowledge it, which makes your internal stability fragile. When someone does not recognize your value, continuing to try to prove it often creates imbalance. You begin to give more than you receive, not just in material or practical ways, but emotionally as well. You invest effort into being understood, appreciated, or chosen, while the other side may not feel the same urgency to reciprocate. This imbalance can slowly turn into frustration, even if it is not immediately visible. You may still act kindly, still show up, still try, but internally, you begin to feel unseen. A key truth is that people perceive value through their own level of awareness, experience, and emotional capacity. Not everyone is capable of recognizing what you bring into their life, not because you are lacking, but because their perception is limited by their own understanding. This means that no amount of explanation or effort can force recognition where awareness does not exist. You cannot make someone see depth if they are only looking at the surface. You cannot make someone value consistency if they are only drawn to intensity. You cannot make someone appreciate emotional maturity if they are accustomed to emotional convenience. Trying to prove your value in such situations often leads to emotional fatigue because you are attempting to change perception through effort instead of recognizing incompatibility. You begin to mistake persistence for growth, when in reality, it may simply be repetition in an environment that does not respond to your efforts. This creates a loop where you keep increasing your input, hoping for a different output, without realizing that the system itself is not designed to reflect your value accurately. Another important aspect is that proving yourself often creates a subtle loss of identity. In the process of trying to be seen by others, you may start adjusting your behavior, suppressing parts of yourself, or amplifying traits you believe will be more acceptable or impressive. Over time, you begin to move away from authenticity and toward performance. You are no longer simply existing as you are constantly shaping yourself based on how you think others will perceive you. This creates internal tension because the version of you that is trying to be accepted may not fully match who you actually are. There is also a psychological cost to constantly seeking validation. Every time your value is not recognized, it can feel like rejection, even if no rejection was explicitly stated. This repeated emotional pattern can slowly affect self-esteem. You may start doubting your worth, not because it has changed, but because it is not being reflected back to you. But self-worth that depends on external reflection becomes unstable, because external perception is inconsistent and often influenced by factors unrelated to your actual value. At the deeper level, the need to prove yourself can also stem from a misunderstanding of how real respect is formed. Genuine respect is not built through persuasion or over-effort, it is built through clarity, consistency, and mutual recognition. When someone values you, you do not have to repeatedly justify your presence. Your actions speak for you, and their response naturally aligns with that understanding. When you constantly have to prove yourself, it often signals that the foundation of recognition is missing. One of the most freeing realizations is understanding that not being recognized does not reduce your value. It only reflects a mismatch between your worth and someone else's ability or willingness to see it. This distinction is crucial because it separates identity from perception. Your value is not something that fluctuates based on approval, it is something that exists regardless of acknowledgement. The moment you begin to internalize this, the need to prove yourself starts to lose its power. Another important shift happens when you stop investing energy in proving and start investing energy in aligning. Instead of asking how to make someone see your value, you begin to ask whether this environment, relationship, or situation is capable of recognizing it at all. This change in perspective moves you from effort-based validation to awareness-based decision-making. You begin to choose spaces where your presence is naturally respected rather than constantly questioned. Over time, letting go of the need to prove your value leads to emotional clarity. You stop over-explaining, overgiving, and overcompensating. You begin to conserve your energy for places where it is actually received with understanding. You also begin to experience relationships and situations more clearly, without the distortion of trying to earn approval. In the end, the need to prove your value fades when you realize that your worth is not a negotiation. It is not something that becomes real through recognition, it is something that is either understood or misunderstood by others. And once you stop trying to force understanding, you create space for peace, authenticity, and alignment with those who naturally recognize what you bring without needing constant proof. Expand key point 9 into 800 words without heading and conclusion. Protecting your peace is more important than pleasing others because peace is not just a feeling, it is a state of internal stability that allows you to think clearly, make better decisions, and stay connected to yourself. When your peace is constantly disturbed for the sake of approval, expectations, or validation from others, you slowly lose access to your own inner clarity. You begin to live in reaction to external demands instead of living in alignment with your internal truth. At first, this may seem harmless, even responsible, because pleasing others often comes with social approval. But over time, it creates a silent cost that most people only recognize when they are already emotionally exhausted. Pleasing others often starts with good intentions. You want to avoid conflict, maintain harmony, or make people feel comfortable around you. There is nothing wrong with kindness or consideration. The problem begins when pleasing becomes a habit that overrides your own needs. You start saying yes when you mean no, staying silent when you want to speak, or agreeing with things that internally disturb you just to avoid discomfort. Each of these moments may seem small, but together they create an internal disconnect between what you feel and what you express. This disconnect is where peace begins to erode. Inner peace depends on alignment, when your thoughts, feelings, and actions are in harmony. But when you constantly prioritize others' comfort over your own truth, you begin to split that alignment. Outwardly, you appear cooperative and agreeable, but inwardly, there is tension. That tension builds quietly over time. You may not notice it immediately, but it shows up later as stress, fatigue, irritability, or emotional numbness. One of the hidden dangers of people-pleasing is that it creates dependence on external approval. Your sense of emotional stability begins to rely on whether others are satisfied with you. If they are happy, you feel okay. If they are disappointed, you feel anxious. If they are upset, you feel responsible. This makes your peace fragile because it is no longer self-contained. It is constantly influenced by external reactions that you cannot fully control. And anything that depends on external conditions is unstable by nature. Protecting your peace requires recognizing that not every expectation deserves your participation. Many people unconsciously project their needs, frustrations, or desires onto others. If you are overly focused on pleasing, you absorb those expectations without questioning whether they align with your capacity or values. Over time, you begin living according to other people's emotional demands rather than your own principles. This creates a life that looks socially acceptable on the outside but feels internally disconnected. Another important aspect is emotional exhaustion. When you constantly try to please others, you are continuously adjusting yourself, your tone, your behavior, your responses, your availability. This constant adjustment requires emotional energy. It forces you to monitor how others perceive you in real time. That level of awareness may seem manageable at first, but over long periods it becomes draining. You are no longer simply living, you are managing impressions. And managing impressions is one of the fastest ways to lose inner peace. Peace also gets disrupted when you suppress your truth to avoid discomfort. Many people believe that speaking honestly will create conflict, so they choose silence instead. But suppressed truth does not disappear, it accumulates internally. Each time you avoid expressing what you truly feel, a small amount of internal tension is added. Over time, this tension builds into resentment or emotional heaviness. You may appear calm externally, but internally there is unresolved pressure that affects your overall well-being. Pleasing others can also distort your sense of identity. When your decisions are based on what others expect rather than what you actually feel, you begin to lose clarity about who you are. You start asking yourself what others want instead of what you want. This shift may seem subtle, but it gradually weakens your connection to your own preferences, boundaries, and desires. Eventually, you may find it difficult to distinguish between your own thoughts and the expectations you have absorbed from others. Protecting your peace means learning that discomfort is not always a sign of something wrong. Many people avoid setting boundaries or expressing disagreement because they associate discomfort with conflict or negativity. But discomfort is often a natural part of growth and self-respect. Saying no, being honest, or choosing yourself may feel uncomfortable in the moment, especially if you are used to pleasing others. However, that discomfort is temporary, while the peace that follows alignment is long-lasting. Another key realization is that you cannot maintain peace by constantly sacrificing yourself. There is a common misconception that peace comes from keeping everyone happy and avoiding all conflict. But in reality, that approach often leads to internal chaos. When you prioritize everyone else's emotional state above your own, you become emotionally overloaded. You carry not only your own feelings but also the emotional expectations of others. This is not peace, it is emotional overcrowding. True peace comes from balance, not sacrifice. It comes from understanding that you are not responsible for managing everyone's emotions. You can be kind without being available to everything. You can be respectful without agreeing to everything. You can care for others without abandoning yourself. This distinction is essential because it allows you to remain connected to others without losing connection to yourself. Protecting your peace also requires accepting that not everyone will understand your choices. When you stop pleasing everyone, some people may feel disappointed or confused. But their reaction does not define whether your decision is right or wrong. If your peace depends on universal approval, it will never be stable. At some point, you have to accept that choosing yourself may not always be understood by others, and that is a necessary part of emotional maturity. Over time, when you prioritize peace over pleasing, your relationships begin to change. Some connections become stronger because they are based on mutual respect rather than obligation. Others may fade because they were dependent on your constant adjustment. This filtering process is not a loss, it is clarity. It reveals which relationships support your well-being and which ones depend on your self-neglect. Ultimately, protecting your peace is about choosing alignment over approval. It is about recognizing that your inner stability is more valuable than external validation. When you stop living for the comfort of others and start living in alignment with your own truth, your life becomes more grounded. You no longer feel pulled in every direction by expectations. Instead, you begin to move with intention, clarity, and emotional balance that is no longer easily disturbed by external noise. Expand key point 10 into 800 words without heading and conclusion. True intelligence is not measured by how much knowledge you accumulate, how well you speak, or how quickly you can solve problems, it is measured by how wisely you manage yourself in real life, especially your energy, emotions, decisions, and relationships. Many people associate intelligence with academic success or mental sharpness, but real-world intelligence is far deeper. It is the ability to understand consequences before they fully unfold, to recognize patterns in human behavior, and to make decisions that protect your future self rather than satisfy your immediate impulses. One of the most important aspects of true intelligence is knowing where to invest your energy. Every person has limited emotional and mental resources each day. If those resources are scattered without awareness, they become diluted and ineffective. So many people give too much attention to situations that do not contribute to their growth, while neglecting areas that actually matter. Intelligent living means understanding that not everything deserves equal investment. Some conversations drain you, some environments limit you, and some relationships consume more than they give back. Recognizing this difference is a form of wisdom that protects your long-term well-being. Timing is another critical part of intelligence. Knowing when to act, when to wait, when to speak, and when to remain silent can completely change outcomes in life. Many people make decisions based on emotion rather than timing, and then face unnecessary consequences. True intelligence involves patience and observation. It understands that not every moment is the right moment, even if the action itself is correct. Acting too early can waste opportunities, and acting too late can close doors. Balancing awareness with timing is what turns knowledge into effective action. Emotional control is also a core element of intelligence. A person can be highly knowledgeable but still make poor decisions if they are controlled by anger, fear, insecurity, or attachment. Emotional reactions often distort perception, making situations appear more urgent or more personal than they actually are. Intelligent behavior involves creating space between emotion and response. That space allows clarity to enter. Instead of reacting instantly, a person evaluates the situation, considers consequences, and chooses a response that aligns with long-term stability rather than short-term relief. Another dimension of intelligence is understanding human behavior. People are not always consistent, logical, or predictable. They act based on emotions, experiences, insecurities, and personal interests. Intelligence involves observing these patterns without being emotionally manipulated by them. For example, recognizing when someone's words do not match their actions, or when attention is given only under certain conditions, helps you avoid emotional confusion. This understanding does not make you distrustful, it makes you aware. Awareness prevents you from building expectations on unstable foundations. True intelligence also involves self-awareness. Many people spend their lives trying to understand others while remaining strangers to themselves. But without self-awareness, external understanding is incomplete. Knowing your triggers, strengths, weaknesses, emotional tendencies, and boundaries is essential for making stable decisions. When you understand yourself, you are less likely to be influenced by external pressure or manipulation. You begin to recognize what situations align with you and what situations slowly drain you. Decision-making is another area where intelligence becomes visible. Intelligent decisions are not always the easiest or most comfortable ones. Often, they involve short-term discomfort for long-term benefit. These might mean walking away from situations that feel familiar but are unhealthy, or choosing discipline over instant gratification. Many people struggle here because emotional comfort often feels more urgent than long-term logic. But intelligence prioritizes future stability over temporary relief. Another important aspect is discernment, the ability to distinguish between what is real and what is surface level. In life, not everything that looks valuable is actually beneficial. Not every opportunity is aligned with your growth. Not every connection is meaningful. Intelligence involves filtering information, people, and opportunities based on depth rather than appearance. This prevents wasted energy and protects your direction in life. Adaptability is also a sign of intelligence. Life is constantly changing, and rigid thinking often leads to unnecessary struggle. Intelligent individuals adjust their approach based on reality rather than clinging to outdated expectations. This does not mean compromising values, it means adjusting strategies while maintaining principles. Adaptability allows growth in environments that are uncertain or challenging, while rigidity often leads to frustration and resistance. Another layer of intelligence is restraint. Not every thought needs to be spoken, not every emotion needs to be expressed, and not every situation requires your involvement. Restraint is not suppression, it is control. It is understanding that unnecessary reactions often create complications that could have been avoided. Many problems in life are not caused by actions themselves, but by impulsive responses to situations that did not require them. True intelligence also involves understanding consequences. Every action creates a chain of outcomes, some immediate and some delayed. People who act without considering consequences often repeat patterns that lead to the same results. Intelligent thinking involves stepping outside the immediate moment and evaluating what each choice will lead to in the future. This foresight helps avoid repeated mistakes and creates more stable life patterns. At its core, intelligence is deeply connected to self-preservation, not in a selfish way, but in a balanced and sustainable way. It is the understanding that if you constantly neglect your own well-being, no external success or approval will compensate for the internal cost. Intelligence teaches you to protect your mental space, your emotional energy, and your direction in life. Ultimately, true intelligence is about alignment. It is the ability to live in a way that is consistent with your awareness, values, and long-term growth. It is not about controlling everything around you, but about controlling your response to everything around you. When you reach that level of understanding, life becomes less reactive and more intentional, less chaotic and more structured. And in that clarity, intelligence becomes not just something you have, but something you live.